Welcome into The Pulse here on Fox 2, Metro Detroit's only nightly political talk show. So much going on, so let's dig right in. The U.S. House has approved President Trump's request to cut more than $9 billion in funding for NPR, PBS, and the U.S. Agency for International Development, known as USAID. It passed by just 2 votes. The cuts are part of President Trump's effort to follow through on work done by the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, under Elon Musk. President Trump using a rarely used tool known as rescissions to claw back federal dollars that Congress already approved. It was already appropriated. Conservatives argue the spending is wasteful, saying the majority of USAID dollars being cut were going towards what they call woke programs, like $1 million for voter ID in Haiti and $3 million for Sesame Street airing in Iraq. They also say NPR and PBS have become increasingly liberal in their bias. But Democrats say the rescissions are hurting the United States standing in the world, and have argued cuts to public broadcasting would hurt small local news outlets and are vital to preventing information deserts. The cuts still need to be approved by the Senate. The nation's capital will host its largest military parade in decades to mark the U.S. Army's 250th birthday on Saturday. The event falling on the same day as Flag Day and President Trump's 79th birthday. And it's seen a long-time goal, really, of his to oversee a massive military parade. President Trump has been talking about this for years. Here's what's going to happen. Tanks will be rolling down Constitution Avenue on Saturday, along with thousands of marching soldiers, paratroopers, and aircraft flyovers. The whole thing could cost as much as $45 million, close to $15 million of that to repair the streets after that heavy artillery runs through those roads. But not everybody sees this as patriotic. In fact, some say it's a display of authoritarianism. And hundreds of protests are planned across the country Saturday using the theme No Kings. Important to note here, other military parades have been held over the past several decades, including in 1942 and 1946 around World War II, and in 1953 during President Eisenhower's first inauguration. And then in 1961, JFK's inauguration, there was also a military parade. The last military parade, or the last parade rather, in Washington was back in 1991 to celebrate the U.S. victory in the Gulf War. That one cost around $12 million. As you know, this show is all about people, so we posted a question online asking your thoughts about the parade this weekend. And so many of you have been chiming in and not very happy about it, writing in saying, if the government is worried about overspending and having all kinds of programs slashed, then I think that's a big no. Tanya has a similar sentiment, writing into The Pulse. Tanya, thanks for your comment. No way that's like buying above your means when you can't afford it. But you have people starving, getting Medicaid cut, and homeless veterans. Wow, only in America. On the other side of things, though, many people are in support of the parade. In fact, Jamie writes in, it's not just a military parade. It's to celebrate and honor the 250th anniversary of the United States Army. And that is well worth celebrating. I have no issue with this funding. Next year, we'll celebrate the 250th anniversary of the founding of the USA, and that needs a massive celebration as well. And Jamie, we thank you for your thoughts here. And I want to point something out. When we ask questions like this, we're not saying that we shouldn't celebrate the great accomplishments of the U.S. Army, because all of us, Democrat and Republicans, whoever you are, support the military, I would hope. And that is an important distinction to make. It's about the money being spent here. We'd like to know what you think. Share your thoughts. Just send us an email to thepulse@fox.com. Let's turn to Los Angeles now, where protesters continue to clash with police and the National Guard. Since the demonstrations broke out, more than 400 people have been arrested in Los Angeles. Protests have also spread to a number of cities across the U.S., including New York, Chicago, and there was even one in Detroit on Wednesday. Protests are expected to continue into the weekend, with the federal government planning to stage more immigration raids as well. And frustrations with the government's immigration actions boiling over today, with Democratic Senator Alex Padilla forcibly removed from this news conference that was being given by Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary. She was in L.A. and she was taking questions about the L.A. ICE raids when this happened. Padilla says he was trying to ask a question, was ushered out, put on the ground, and temporarily handcuffed. Officials say Padilla was not wearing his security pin and was released after he was identified. Shortly after the incident, Noem told Fox News she actually had a very civil discussion with Senator Padilla, calling it, quote, cordial and also beneficial. Well, let's talk about how big of an area this is where the protests are taking place in Los Angeles. So many people don't understand the perspective. Tonight, we're talking to one person who has a lot of perspective, a California native and one of the most familiar faces in Detroit television, Rob Wolchek, on the Pulse here tonight. And it's so good to see you, Rob. Thanks for joining us here.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Rue.
Well, it's good to have you. You and I talk a lot when we do our streaming show on the stream, and we talk a lot about California, especially the last few days. I want you to give people an idea of the lay of the land. If you could compare the area where these protests are taking place in LA to a place in Detroit, what would it look like?
Well, I think it's an area, it would be like if there was a group of people protesting around, say, Little Caesars Arena. It's not very big. It's a very small area. What really prompted all of this was when I was talking yesterday with you on the streaming show, and they were talking about, I keep seeing all these headlines, the Los Angeles riots, the Los Angeles riots, the Los Angeles riots. This is a very small area. I speak to friends that I have in Los Angeles all the time, and they've all told me, you know, this is nothing. This is a small civil unrest, and they're kind of blowing it all up, sending out the National Guard and all of this kind of stuff. Most of the people in Los Angeles are completely unaffected by this, as opposed to the Los Angeles riots, which I covered. So that happened in 1992, April 29th of 1992. That was real rioting. So it's kind of an insult that they would be calling this, labeling this riots, because it's a civil unrest situation.
This is a really important distinction, and I think the media, and that includes us, and we shoulder the responsibility of giving people an understanding of context, because that's how people make up their minds about things. When we show pictures on television, we have to make the distinction. When you see the people clashing and fighting, those were the first hours and days of this particular unrest. In the last 24 hours, we understand that there's a curfew in effect. Things have been calm. Protesters are actually dancing out there and just passing somewhat of a good time in order to stand up for a point, but not cause any big problems.
Listen, there's no doubt that there was some unrest.
Of course there was. Yeah, we saw it.
People are very upset about the immigration rates. Los Angeles, California in general, there's a very large immigrant population, and people in California depend upon the immigrants to pick the fruit, to run the machines that pick the almonds, to work in all the hotels and restaurants and all of that. So it's a big part of the system there. So there were legitimate protests. Some of the protests got out of hand, and there's no question, setting the Waymos on fire, throwing bricks down on the freeway.
Hurting an ICE agent who's just doing their job, that's not acceptable to anyone.
Absolutely, and that was, you know, terrible behavior that's wrong. However, they keep showing the same 3 Waymos on fire. They keep showing that one freeway off-ramp, which I even know where that freeway is, where they're dropping the bricks onto the police cars. You know, totally bad stuff, but not a riot, just some bad actors at a protest. And a lot of people, the majority of the people at the protest, as at all protests, I've covered a bunch of protests in my time, as have you. Most of them are just seriously upset. They're carrying their signs, they're shouting, stop the immigration, the ICE, stop whatever, you know. And then you have some bad actors, and unfortunately, with this such a charged atmosphere, it kind of got out of hand. And different media outlets cover it differently.
You're right about that.
And that's the whole thing. I watch everything. I watch some CNN. I watch some Fox News. I watch some MSNBC. I read the Daily Mail newspaper, which is kind of a right-leaning newspaper. I read these things, and that's where I see a lot of the riot, and they show these Waymos on fire. They show the guy carrying the Mexican flag that looks all sinister, and he's got flames behind him and everything, and people think, oh my God, Los Angeles is
on fire,
and it's terrible and all this. And then I talk to my friends, and it's like, yeah, man, just another day at work here.
Well, we went live to LA on the Pulse yesterday, and we talked with Alex Mickelson, who's an anchor out there. And I said, what's it feel like right now? He says, there's a curfew in effect. There's really no issue right now. People are protesting. I want to point something out, and your perspective is so interesting. You talked about the farmers. And I found this fascinating. Today, President Trump was asked about the number of farmers that are illegals, so to speak, who are working on farms in California and really across the country, but in California. And he was asked about what you think about deporting them. And he said today on television, and you can look it up, President Trump himself said, we have to figure something out about that because so many farmers depend on these workers to bring the crops to American people. So we can't broad brush. And it's weird because some of the MAGA loyalists are saying things that are far more inflammatory than the president himself, who's saying, hey, we have to work with these farmers to make sure that people who are illegals who are here peacefully can find a place to stay. And I think that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, listen, I worked out in Fresno and Bakersfield, which are in the Central Valley of California. I grew up in the Los Angeles area, but I worked out there. And it's a very conservative Republican area. But there's all these farms. And when I'm talking about farms, I mean gigantic farms. I mean, this is where they produce everything. They grow everything.
Pistachios, avocados,
every almond, every piece of fruit that you buy, pretty much, it comes from the Central Valley. And every year, thousands of immigrants come up and they work in those fields. And those big factory farms, so to speak, you know, they're all owned by Dole and Sunkist and Sun-Made Raisins and all that.
Big money.
And, you know, they're high-tech, they're huge, and all of the labor is Mexicans. I don't know whether they're legal Mexicans or illegal Mexicans or anything like that. They're hardworking people that are doing good work. They're good people for the most part. So I don't know
President Trump,
how they're going to operate.
Today, President Trump, just hours ago today, said we have to figure something out about all of those farmers because there are illegal, and he even said that if you end up getting rid of those peaceful migrants who are here illegally, then he's afraid that you'll backfill that with people who are not as peaceful and perhaps dangerous. That was his opinion. An interesting situation and a unique perspective from Rob Wolchek, the Hall of Shame guy on the Pulse. This is fun to have you here. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ruth. I appreciate it.
Did a great job. Thank you, Rob. Come back again. Well, a friend of President Trump is actually in Studio C with us tonight to talk about the military parade scheduled for this weekend and a Democratic commentator who has some strong feelings about the parade and the deportations. Both of that next. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Welcome back to The Pulse on Fox 2, Metro Detroit's only nightly political talk show. And joining us now, two people who are no stranger to Studio C here on The Pulse, former Democratic state rep and current Detroit School Board member and commentator Sherry Gay-Degnago, and businessman and former presidential candidate, and safe to say, a friend of President Donald Trump's, Perry Johnson. Good to see you both. Thanks for joining us on The Pulse.
Good to be here.
I find that interesting, Perry. We ended the segment with Rob Wolchek talking about how today President Trump at a news conference basically echoed what so many people on the left were saying about the workforce in California and elsewhere that are filled with those who are perhaps illegals. And President Trump himself today said we may have to figure something out because we can't just take all these workers who are, by the way, supporting the American economy and send them away. Do you think the MAGA right loyalists who take over social media aren't really listening closely to this president about what he really thinks?
Well, I'm confident of one thing. He knows that a lot of these people out there that are working the farms are needed. And he thinks that they contribute a lot. He is certainly in favor of doing whatever we can to make sure that we can continue to have food. Because if we suddenly are in a position where we don't have those workers, it is a problem. His major issue always centered around drugs. It centered around the whole idea that we were having fentanyl shipped to this country. We had a whole lot of people in the cartel that could easily cross the border. And because we had this drug problem that was rife throughout, not just in one area, literally rife throughout the country, we did not want to do anything to promulgate that. And we were, by just allowing people to freely cross the border. And that was a huge problem.
I find it so interesting. Alexis Wiley was on just last night on The Pulse talking about how, look, this immigration issue has been an issue for a while. You can't deny that the Biden and Kamala Harris administration did not do a great, powerful job in controlling the border. And by the way, it's been a problem for longer than that administration. Do you think, Sherry, that this president trying to crack down in any way is the right way to do it and the right thing to do?
Well, so here's the problem I have with what Perry just shared, that the impetus was just drugs. I don't buy that at all. Having, a student that was picked up by ICE just this last week. 18 years old, a kid that's almost about to graduate from Columbia, had already willingly with his parents agreed to self-deport once he's done with school. But to be picked up and the cost that is associated with taking him away from his family, taking him to New Orleans, and shipping him back to his country, what drugs was associated with that? I agree that both sides could have done better. But I think the problem lies within the fact that every time there's an opportunity to move forward with a bipartisan approach, you have to remember it was Donald Trump who pushed back on the bipartisan bill that would allow for more money being invested in the border, allowing for, the courts were overloaded, the officers are overloaded. Texas was being hit the hardest. But he pushed back on those solutions that were bipartisan just to make the case for his presidency, Perry. So we have to be honest. Both sides could have certainly done a better job, but we got to start taking the politics out of solutions that matter. And oftentimes, I've seen fault on both sides.
Perry, I have to ask you the question that has gotten a lot of people talking about who has been allowed in this country to seek asylum and those who are being perhaps vilified for doing the same thing. We know that there are South Africans who are white who have been brought into this country because President Trump said we have to protect them. But at the same time, there are so many who are coming from the southern border who say they're also seeking asylum. Is there a double standard here?
Well, let's go back to the person at Columbia University. The person at Columbia University, as I understand it, was organizing a protest, and they were a guest in our country. If we were to organize a protest in England and we were a guest of that country, they would not look favorably upon that either. They're a guest of our country. Now, we're not talking about just somebody who is idly by attending the school and not organizing. They were organizing on their own. But when you do something like that and you're spearheading an effort, it looks as though you are potentially somebody who was sent from an outside organization to specifically cause problems.
But with the South Africans who were allowed into this country who were not black, who were white South Africans, do you think there was a double standard there?
If they organize and protest, they should be treated the same way.
That wasn't the question,
But the question was about whether or not
nothing would have been. No,
it's a double standard to say that someone who is a white South African should be able to seek asylum for safety, but not someone who's coming from Mexico.
Let's back up. Okay, the question was related to whether or not we had a situation where somebody should be, and she cited Columbia, should be taken outside of Columbia.
I wasn't talking about Columbia University. I was talking about an 18-year-old student at Western International Detroit Public Schools. So those are two separate incidents.
I thought you were referring to Columbia.
No, absolutely not. But the question that he asked was,
I'm not familiar with the person at Western.
It's an 18-year-old senior. But he didn't answer the question.
I understand
we got to be honest. But if you remember those horses that were beating back Haitians trying to come into this country, you know there's a double standard, and we're not honest. And I'm not suggesting that the Columbia University student that you named in trying to launch a protest, I would have been jailed in another country. I know that. And so we have to have checks and balances.
This is complicated, and there are different circumstances for each case. And we're talking about a couple different issues at the same time. But I do want to get to this before we go. We only have a minute left. Military parade, $45 million. This after DOJ just finished cleaning up government, saying we saved $180 billion. Do you think a $45 million parade is just pocket change compared to what we're talking about here, Perry? And is it worth it?
Well,
is it something we should do?
In fairness, it is pocket change compared to what we're talking about. But the most important thing to keep in mind is that I do not think our military gets enough recognition as it is. And when you take a look at what goes on and what they've sacrificed, and I know people that have literally lost limbs.
Sure.
And my heart bleeds for them. So,
Sherry, do you think?
We give them a parade, or we give them prescriptions? Have you been down to the VA hospital to see how many veterans are sitting there without adequate health care, without getting their prescriptions, without housing? Many of them are homeless. So it may be a drop in the bucket to you.
I do not believe that.
Many of our veterans are struggling and suffering. Let's take a ride down to Veterans Hospital. They're not getting the treatment and the support support that they need. Many of them are homeless. Many of them are facing crisis,
So,
and they
Sherry,
can't
you don't
afford
believe a
it.
parade at this point is something that's appropriate? You think
I do
take care
not,
of your,
not at that scale.
Take care of your veterans.
Especially the optics are right now, this authoritarianism, putting forth 4,000 National Guards in Los Angeles. You know, this imagery that is being created in our country right now doesn't look good. So whether 50 million doesn't seem like a whole lot to you or not.
How when we were burning down buildings, we were facing government property.
Uprising, a
in
small
Seattle
uprising.
and Portland.
You're talking about 2020. Listen,
this is
we
nutty.
We're in 20. What year is this? 25?
We're going back to what happened during COVID and all of the damage that was done. When we talk about riots, we have riots that go
What's
on.
really important is that everything that is being said here goes back to, as you say, making sure that those who are working in our military, who took care of us so that we could have the right to sit here and argue, we have to honor them. And you're saying do
Not
it by
with the
way of
parade.
them. You're saying a parade is appropriate. So many of you agree. Listen, we're not going to adjudicate all of it here on the set, but both your opinions are valuable, and we thank you both for your time. Perry, Sherry, thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, as immigration protests continue, we're getting some unique perspectives from a man who came to the States as a Vietnamese refugee and who was in L.A. when the 1992 riots were happening. A look at his experience, and we'll have more on that coming up. Welcome back to The Pulse, where we focus on all things people, power, and politics. You know, of course, we've been talking about it all week long. The immigration protests in L.A. involve people, power, and politics. And those demonstrations, well, they've resonated with so many people on so many levels. That includes Quang Pham, a Marine combat pilot and biotech CEO who is a refugee from Vietnam and was attending UCLA when the 92 riots happened in L.A. He joins us now on The Pulse via Zoom from sunny Florida. And we thank you for your time today. It's good to see you.
It's good to be on with the citizens of Detroit and Michigan.
I know you have some friends who are actually watching who are from here, and they look forward to your appearance here today, as we are also looking forward to this conversation. You recently wrote a book that combines a lot of themes, including immigration and identity, and then boom, all of this takes place. Talk for a moment about your reflections on what you're seeing.
Well, first of all, I'm just grateful to be able to come to the United States at the end of the Vietnam War as a child. And so, got to become a citizen, serve my country, a United States Marine Corps officer and a pilot. Just a correction, I graduated from UCLA in 1987, and the riots were in 1992. And so I was an active duty officer in Southern California when the riots happened. And it was a year after the Persian Gulf War. And there was going to be a big parade that summer, but we were among the first units to go back to the Persian Gulf the year after the Gulf War. And then April of 1992, the LA riots happened. So it was an intense few weeks for us, especially for me, because I grew up north of Dodger Stadium, rooted for the Dodgers in the 80s and the late 70s, and having attended UCLA, which was about 12 miles to the west of downtown. And we were just out there. Los Angeles is a beautiful city. I consider it my former hometown, and so it's tragic to see United States Marines being sent there, because a lot of things could go wrong, and that's what all of us pray doesn't happen.
How important is it to kind of frame this correctly when you look at the diversity that is in that area? That city has so much of it, and so many people from Mexico and elsewhere live there, whether they're illegally or legally.
Well, I grew up in the late 70s in a town called Oxnard. It was a very diverse town, a lot of Mexican immigrants and citizens. Los Angeles, I believe, is 50% Hispanics and Latinos. And just for the folks that may not know, the United States Marine Corps in the enlisted ranks is very diverse, very much full of patriotic Hispanics, Latinos, Mexican Americans, immigrants, citizens in its ranks. So at least in 1992, the thoughts of going back in there, and obviously African Americans, to go back into a city that's diverse in your homeland while you're getting ready to go overseas to the Persian Gulf had a lot of mixed feelings. And I imagine that members of the units coming from 29 Palms probably have the same composite today of the demographics, and to go back. Perhaps some of those Marines are from Los Angeles and Southern California. Just the thought of having to go back to do police state in a town as diverse as LA. And I think the previous guest had it right. This is very much restricted to certain parts of downtown Los Angeles, and it's very different than the 1992 riots, which really spread it outside of the suburbs as well.
Some good context here. Kwong, I just want to say thank you for your time, just sampling a little bit of your expertise. Of course, your book, so many people would be interested to read, but we thank you for your time here. Underdog Nation is the name of the book. Look for it where you find your favorite books. Kwong, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Roop.
And thank you for joining us. Remember, if you have a question or a topic you'd like to see covered, just send us an email at thepulse@fox.com. I'm Roop Raj. As always, it was good to be with you.